is now my pleasure and honour to introduce the moderator of this session, Barbara Kane, with Clark Food Service Equipment. The topic, sustainability, has become a very key driver in our business, and as this panel will explore a key consideration for us all. Barbara has worked in the food service industry for over 35 years, holding various sales and operations positions with Marriott, Sara Lee Corporation and Ecolab. She recently retired, as much as Barb could, and is now consulting for Clark Food Service Company. And Barbara has also held numerous association board positions and was the first business partner to be elected the President of Society of Hospitality and Food Service Management. She frequently keynotes to associations and corporations on topics ranging from women in business, networking and leadership. So please welcome Barbara Kane.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, I got to turn the page. All right, so we all obviously know sustainability has been a hot topic for years. It got to the point we were sick of hearing sustainability sessions at conference, but then COVID hit and sustainability went out the window. So what we'd like to do is bring it back, but in a different fashion. So we're going to address the myths around sustainability to try and determine what actually sustainability is. And we're going to be separating fact from fiction. So this is going to be an interactive session. So we are going to be doing some polling questions, to keep you all awake, because I saw half this room in the bar last night. So we're going to be doing some polling questions to keep you engaged with it. So I'm assuming everyone has the app already downloaded. If you go to the sessions and then hit this on the schedule, hit this session, and then you're going to see a green start the poll. Go ahead and hit that button. You're going to see the 5 polls. Now we're going to be doing this throughout the session. You can either answer all the polls now and we're going to come up and see it live, or you can do it as we ask the polling questions. We will be filming this session. We have quite a few military people that are part of SHFM that, for obvious reasons, are serving our country and could not be here. So I wanted to do a shout out for Chief Tayshawn Taylor, who is a dear friend of SHFM's, and I had the privilege to meet her. She's on the Hennessy Traveler team. So shout out to you, and thank you all for your service. So to get everybody kind of, now I don't stay on stage, I kind of like to walk around because to me it's more about our panelists than it is about the moderator. So we're going to start with a polling question just to kind of get you all used to using the app. So if you pull up the first polling question, which of these topics are you most interested in hearing about today? So these are the 4 that we used in the session description. So this is a great way for our panelists to understand, what are you guys interested in hearing about? We as the committee kind of choose topics, but is that really what you want to hear about? So let's see what's trending. Pretty much what we thought. We kind of thought between waste initiatives and recycling. So that's interesting that the plant alternative protein isn't as high as it was. So, okay, good. So let's start with the obvious question. What does sustainability mean to the 4 of you, our panelists? Anna, you want to start with that one?
Sure, yes. Good morning, everyone. Sustainability can mean very many different things to whoever the audience is and who's the team or the organization that's planning. To me, it is about making the most informed decisions that you possibly can for where your business is at in that state. Of course, thinking strategically and into the future, but making the best choices with as much information as possible, whether it's with packaging or food sourcing and procurement, but doing the best that you can with your budget and your physical space that you have and infrastructure, et cetera, but for the better of the health of your employees or yourselves as well as for the better of your company and the planet.
Awesome.
I'm
Go ahead.
gonna
Oh, we're
apologize
going to
for-
call Mike Coach.
Yeah.
Did I forget to introduce the panelists? You know, I'm a person that always stays on script, and the first time that I don't turn a page, so I'm sorry, guys. So I'm going to introduce our panelists because you're all going, who the heck's speaking? That's really cute. We're going to start with Anna Bobot with LinkedIn. We're just going to call Mike Coach. So Smitha Hanif with Harvard University was supposed to be here. Harvard has an unbelievable sustainability program. Unfortunately, Smitha got sick and could not make it. So good old Michael, or Coach as we now call him, right? Go Pink. Who's Pink? So Michael is filling in, so we thank you and appreciate the fact that you are joining us so last minute. Kate Kerbel is with Mark Cushman Wakefield. It's very hard when you don't have your script with you. And then we have Mike Dwork, who is the CEO of Viterra Dinnerware. So welcome our panelists. Should have stepped with the script, so. Okay, now back to the question.
Yeah, so I apologize for my voice in advance. I clearly took the captain role pretty serious last night. Thank you. But I really look at it as continuous evolving changes that have an impact on the environment, right? And I think it touches a bunch of sectors and industries, pending where you are differently. But I think it's always evolving, and that's the key thing to understand, that we get very complacent sometimes in what we put in place, and sustainability as a whole is always evolving.
Kate?
Great. I go back to just the simple reduce, reuse, recycle. So reduce what you can, reuse what you can, so you're using fewer virgin materials, and then recycle, and we'll talk about recycling a lot today. But I think also the word sustainable is really something you need to be able to make a habit and reproduce. So, like crash diets don't work because you don't actually, you're not actually able to cut out whatever because of your lifestyle. So understanding the human element and making things easy for people and bringing that entire human experience into these habits that we want to continue to implement.
That's a great point. And Michael?
I take a very long view on sustainability. I think that sustainability is really sort of a thoughtful journey that we're all on, and it's never trying to make a lot of immediate change or looking for that immediate gratification in the decisions that you're making, but really looking at your system, your process, everything, and evaluating that at every step, and looking at the products that you're using, looking at how you're treating them, looking at where they come from and where they're going, and really just constant improvement. It's really being thoughtful and deliberate in all your decisions.
Great. So let's start with our first myth, since obviously that is the goal of this session. So we're going to pull up our first myth is there is no such thing as being too sustainable. And I know all of you are kind of sitting there going, well, that's kind of weird. So it probably can relate to a bunch of different things. So to our panelists, have any of you had an example of something being too much or too sustainable? Kate, let's start with you on that one.
Right, so I'm fairly familiar with one company that actually decided in an act of sustainability to not allow any employees to charge meat. So it was a plant-based diet on the company dime, so any events by the company were all vegetarian, and if you were traveling and needed to expense anything or team lunches, it was no meat allowed. So some people may say in this audience, oh, that's great, but it felt like a big imposition to a lot of people. It's a very personal choice what you're choosing to put in your body. You may have other restrictions, so that was a pretty extreme effort on their part.
That's absolutely amazing. Can you guys imagine? I'd be paying a lot of my own expense reports, that's for sure. Anybody else have some examples of a little too sustainable?
I mean, being in facilities, I go into a lot of buildings, and the one thing I'll say is it's not really a specific example, but greenwashing. And if you're not familiar, I don't want to say it's propaganda, but it's like misguided information on sustainable things or things that companies are putting as initiatives. And I've been in cases where I walk in a building and I feel like the whole wall is covered in it and none of the messages correlate or basically sing the same song. And I think communication in your program, anything towards sustainability, is really the most important part. And sometimes greenwashing can really misguide that.
That's a great point.
Can I add one tiny example? Another example kind of related to greenwashing is, aiming for 100% organic in your food program, for example. There are a lot of small farms that are close to your operation that could benefit from their products being sourced that are following regenerative practices that might not have that USDA organic stamp on it. And the way to truly understand your sources and give back to your local communities and give back to farmers who are giving back to the soil health and the land, which will ultimately help draw down carbon. It's about relationships and creating relationships directly with your procurers or the people providing you all your products, whether it's produce, meat, etc. So really digging in and leaning in and establishing relationships, and that's how you truly establish a really well, high values program.
Very interesting. Michael.
And for me, what I often see is an operator decide or a company decide that they're going to be sustainable tomorrow. And along the lines of what Michael said, that's where you always make the mistake. That's where you wind up getting hit with the greenwashing. You try to be too sustainable too quickly. I don't know that there's too sustainable. I think there's too sustainable too quickly, where you throw everything out. Somebody comes in and tells you to change everything. You make all these changes, and I can guarantee that most of them are going to be the wrong ones for your unit because they took lessons that they learned somewhere else. They applied them to what you were doing, and your likelihood of success is not great. And that to me is then you have that secondary part where everybody comes back to you and says, oh, it doesn't work, or it doesn't work for us, or here's all the reasons. And it was because it wasn't a slow, deliberate process. I think that, again, slow change is always better change. I know that's not exciting to hear, but it allows for better decision making and for you to come up with the right solutions for any of your units.
And it's probably hard because the demand from our customers is that you turn it, and that's probably where we get into trouble with that. So let's switch over to the waste initiative. That was something that was fairly high up on our polling. So we're going to put up our second myth around waste. We're going to put up our second myth. Zero waste means zero waste, meaning nothing's going into the landfill. I think we all know that that is probably very true. Let's see, sometimes when we hear waste, we automatically think of food waste. So I'd like to jump to our next polling question, which is who or what is the top food waster? And you'll see that on your poll. Can we pull that up? So cruise ships, consumer, banquet, hotel, we didn't see waste last night because they were running out of food, but in most hotels we see a lot of waste because they're doing that. What's trending the highest seems to be consumer. Awesome. Perfect. Very good. Look at how much we know about sustainability. The consumer are the number one wasters. So what can be done to reduce food waste either at home or in our food service operations? And I'm just going to throw that out there.
Food waste at home, number one rule, never go grocery shopping hungry. Trader Joe's becomes super dangerous at that point. But depending what industry you're in, food waste, you can really battle it a bunch of ways, but really, I personally think each aspect of your business, whether you're a chef, operator, admin in my case, you serve a different role. So like for chefs, I think, and buyers, forecasting is super crucial. I also think you have to understand who your client is. Portion control is super big when you go into nutrition. And on the flip side, if you do have food waste, what are you doing about it? Are you upcycling it? Are you repurposing it? Are you donating it? At NYU, the university, we're super conscious about that, and that's because of the students. I may be a young professional here, but I'll be open and say this is probably the first time I feel a disconnect with the younger generation, so I might be getting old. But they seem to be very forward in their thought process when it comes to food waste or sustainability in general. And through my conversations with them, I think it's because they really get a grasp of like, this is going to affect our generation the most because they're younger. Whereas 20 years ago, 30 years ago, no offense, I just don't think we had that foresight yet because a lot of these metrics weren't attainable. And now as technology is getting better, metrics that we previously couldn't get, we are getting, and we're seeing what the impacts are. So students are being very forward with this. Some ways NYU does it. We have 2 programs, Courtesy Meals and Swipe It Forward, basically ways for students who have food insecurity, which is a growing issue not just in universities. And I think specifically right now, it's super important when you talk about inflation and price changes, like an affordable meal that's nutritious is that much more costly, and it's only going to continue to have that separation and increase in price, which is actually a huge problem. So trying to find ways to uniquely deliver that or help where you can with programs that donate, I think is super crucial to addressing food waste and waste in general.
I'll add, from a consumer side at home, meal planning, figuring out in advance what you're going to cook for the family, for yourself, etc., and shopping more often. So instead of buying for a week's worth and not getting to it, that happens a lot. So shopping more often and smaller amounts and kind of figuring it out as you go throughout the week can help a lot. From a business side, forecasting out purchases based on historical trends of consumption, with all the variables in mind, of course. It is pretty challenging when you have a free-for-all kind of buffet setup that's free, which is what we used to have, and post-COVID we've moved away from self-serve buffets at LinkedIn. We are now doing We Serve You and or pre-portioned meals, and we err on the smaller side, so that does help. When we were doing full-size meals, people were actually only eating one component of the meal and then the rest was going in the trash. So we quickly worked with our food service partners to adjust and reduce the sizes, which helps a lot. But having a plan in place with all of your operators, globally, if you have a global account and consistency of what are you doing in the back of house? What do we have in place? And what are you doing with the post-consumer waste in the dish rooms as well as on the food line? And is that going into the gray bins and going to landfill? Let's talk to our local waste hauler. So we have very good relationships on a first name basis with our local processing facilities and waste haulers. And we actually reach out to them before back in the day when we had disposables, we're now phasing them out. We would reach out and say, do you accept this compostable fork in your facility? And we had that relationship, and honestly, it's been very, very helpful to do that. But seeing if there's a local food scraps program that uses anaerobic digestion to break down the volume of the food waste, and then it can get processed into animal feed. There's so many solutions out there. It's just about reaching out and asking and establishing relationships.
I would add a few suggestions from the WELL building standard, and I think we'll talk about standards a little bit more, so maybe put a pin in that. But 2 strategies they recommend in terms of food waste is actually having 2 sizes of plates, so one being on the smaller side. So if you are in a buffet style or situation, people having that option of just getting a little bit less food, and people tend to just fill whatever size plate they have. There's research around that. And then also the standard has a strategy of having 2 size portions of the same meal. So whether that be for health or for food waste, you can get, this size of this entree or a smaller size. They actually happen to recommend something under 650 calories, but you can imagine that might be giving people those options results in less food waste.
Just a different take on what Kate was saying is, and we've done a lot of work with this, moving some of our clients when they want to reduce portion size and food cost, literally just from a 9-inch plate to an 8-inch plate. It takes 20% of the plating space out, and when most people are either plating for themselves as a buffet or when you're serving them, The normal proportion is about 70% of coverage of food on a plate. So by doing that, you're going to reduce the amount. And for most people, they eat what they took, or they eat what was on the plate. So you're going to reduce your overall portion size. And very frankly, on an 8-inch plate, you're going to get, your same 8 ounces. You can fit a burger and a side. You could fit an 8-ounce protein portion and 2 veg. All the things that you would normally be serving, but it's just going to be reduced, and it's going to be more appropriate portion size versus a 9, where all of a sudden 14 ounces looks better, or 12 ounces, and you're going to have almost 10 ounces of sides versus 7 to 8 ounces of sides. So from a food cost, food waste, and consumption standpoint, literally a slight change in a plate size can make a huge difference.
And one thing I'll add too is 40% of the food that's grown in the US goes to waste. So our entire system along the supply chain is broken. And a lot of that it's just very antiquated. A lot of farmers, I know a lot of them personally, and I visit them and have spoken with them. They have to meet a specific spec for the size of their peach in order for their distributor to accept the peach to then ship it to specific grocery stores. Why? Everything else that doesn't meet that spec, they either have to find a use for it. So a lot of them sell that at the farmer's market. What doesn't meet the spec that goes to the distributor gets sold at the farmer's market. There might be a local CSA program that they may or may not have the labor to pull off. Another option is some farmers are starting to look at on-site kitchens to make jams or to dehydrate their fruit. But it's just a broken system. And so, and here's the crazy part, is the ones that don't have the resources to get a truck to ship it to do the farmer's market, can't hire anyone, they leave it on the fields to rot. And that is emitting carbon. And so it's a systemic issue, and it needs to be addressed.
And maybe we all in this room can, sorry if there are any distributors in this room, but bring that back. That's the education piece that we need to educate more than just our clients and customers. We need to educate everyone. Anna, can you touch on the EPA hierarchy?
Yes, the EPA has a pyramid that's called the Food Recovery Hierarchy, and it's a great resource for your teams. I'm sure your sustainability team might have seen this, but a great resource to leverage to help drive your strategy for reducing waste at your business. The first and foremost way to address reducing waste would be just to make less of it, have less of it, right? That's a given. But after that, it goes to feeding people. So whatever can't be reduced would then have to go to feeding people. After that goes feeding animals, industrial use after that. This one's not as detailed as the other version, so just Google it, EPA Food Waste Recovery Hierarchy. And industrial uses, so biofuels, turning it into pellets and animal feed and things like that. And then lastly would be having it go to landfill. So the last thing we want is our food waste to go to the landfill, because it's just gonna, sit there and emit carbon.
So Kate had mentioned the well building, and when we were discussing this, I had really not heard of it. I had sort of heard on it. So we're gonna bring up the next polling question to find out how familiar you are with today's certifications. We all know LEED, so our next polling question is, which of these have you heard of? And you'll see on your polling app, there's quite a few difference. There's LEED, which to me everybody knows, Well Building, Fitwel, Energy Star, BREEAM, the Living Building Channel, then Challenge, and then this is great to see, the 2 or more. We couldn't do where you could pick multiple, so the fact that 75% know 2 or more, and then none of the above, you're going to see that, especially if people are not on the building side of their business. So that's really interesting. BREEAM and the Living Building Challenge, no one's heard of. Kate, that's really interesting. So anything more on what zero waste means to you all?
Yeah, I don't think we talked about it, but when you're creating your strategies around zero waste, it's important to work with, if you have it, a sustainability team that represents your company. So LinkedIn has committed to being zero waste by 2030. What does that mean? It depends which certification you choose. So right now we're looking at UL, which is what Microsoft uses, or True, and we're debating on which one we're going to go with. But True, for example, is a minimum 90% of all of your waste is diverted from going to landfill. 90%. So you have to look at the double click, the fine print, right? So that means that 10% is probably going to go to landfill. And so discussing with your teams about how you're going to get to that 90% and seeing areas of opportunity for reducing that 10, ideally we're all at 100, but it's very challenging.
So Kate, can you discuss those certifications? Julie, if we can put the polling question back up.
Sure, of course. The ones for the specific waste diversion percentage you just mentioned are a little bit separate from these, a little more specific, but I think it's great to touch on all of these. I can't quite see the order they're in, but I think that's okay. So we all are pretty familiar with LEED. Really what I've seen now with clients is that's sort of just table stakes, that's the given. Yes, we're building to LEED standards, we're operating at LEED standards. We may or may not pay the money to get the actual stamp, but we're hearing much more about Fitwel and then the WELL building standard, which are similar in the sense that they focus on the health of people. So they have certain categories just like LEED does, and there is overlap. You of course think of great air quality, that helps people and it also helps the planet. But I would say that WELL building standard, specifically the nourishment category, is very relevant to this group. I referenced a couple of things from that just a few minutes ago. But it is very specifics about how a food program could contribute to the health of people, whether that's serving, not serving things with a certain amount of sugar, or having smaller portions, having smaller plates, and then also the other categories looking at physical activity. So all of these things working together. And there's also, I don't think it's on here, but there's the Reset Air Standard, which has been coming up more and more as people returning from COVID ask about how is the air quality in these buildings. So there are very many. Like I said, I think the WELL building's probably the most relevant in this context, and they have all of their features online pretty clearly. So just WELL certification and then the nourishment category, and you can read through them. What I would also mention is that WELL building and Fitwel, which is also similar. Fitwel's a little easier to attain. You can also look into that. They actually put out standards for COVID and like safety and return from COVID specifically. So those are great to look at as well. And just to mention maybe on something that we touched on yesterday is that those return policies actually have some things about diversity and inclusion and what the policies are and who do you involve when you're discussing things like that. So I think that's great to see from these standards evolving as well.
Awesome. I'm going to open up, we have our mic runners. Does anyone have any questions for the panels on waste before we move on? Anyone?
In the interim, if I could just add
Go ahead.
to the certification. So on a real estate and facility side, I think, and I don't know if this is consensus through the group, but you have to be really strategic in what certification that you decide to chase. You shouldn't, there's a term in the industry like don't go chasing points. A lot of these programs are point-based and you find yourself trying to just get the highest score. So I hate to say this, you can tote a different emblem at the entrance of your building. You really have to have like an approach that actually has an impact. You shouldn't just be chasing points, and you're seeing that LEED and WELL work well together, and they're basically a combination of what you should have in a building for overall use. And I personally think on the real estate side, this is going to continue to evolve. So if you're familiar with New York, you may see energy ratings now in the front of your buildings. Like there are certain programs and governance going in where there's going to be accountability if you don't achieve certain ratings. And I think we all can agree that finance does drive change in some cases, specifically penalties. So it's super, you should not just do it to avoid the penalties, you should also do it for the impact. And I just think that's the strategic approach you should take.
That's a great point. Question?
Just a quick question.
Can
Wondering
you do your name and company and then ask
Sure.
your question?
Andrew Hamilton from Vivro Water Systems. Wondering if, on the core level, if you would agree that the biggest challenge is breaking human habit.
Yeah, we're bad. History repeats itself. But like I was mentioning with the students and the younger generation, like they are super forward thinking. Like even my 19-year-old brother, who I don't give a lot of credit, he's doing pretty well when it comes to sustainable things and like even correcting me on some things or like being conscious of cooking at home. Like I was actually shocked to see him cook a meal, but he's like, I'm not gonna go out with all my friends, spend this extra money. Like and I think it ties back to just affordability. Like cost of living keeps going up, and I think younger generations are really understanding that. So finding ways to be creative with financing and putting a meal on a plate is definitely good. But yes, I think it's all behavioral.
Yeah, behavior change is one of the best, it's one of the most challenging, but ultimately that's how you will create change. In order to do that, you need buy-in to create that behavior change. People are used to their ways. That's how we all are. We have our habits, we have our routines. However, education and exposure to information will have them start to ask questions and become more conscious consumers. And I think that is the goal. We as our companies, we need to function as a conscious consumer as well and look at all the pieces of where we source our products, where's it coming from, who's providing it, and I think we're all starting to dig deeper on that. But for all of the consumers or your clients, giving them, empowering them to make better choices will ultimately create the behavior change.
I actually think that, frankly, COVID gives a little bit of a reset in some ways to a lot of operators in what they can do in their units, right? When everything was going 100 miles an hour, you didn't have the ability to just make change or think about your processes or take this opportunity. And I think now, and I'm hearing this more and more, as people are reopening their offices and they're going 5%, 10%, whatever it might be, it allows you to make important changes that you might not otherwise ever again have the ability to make. And taking the time to really understand, be it on the building side with the certifications that matter are, or I know from a either recyclable or compostable side, understanding what the difference between a BPI certified compostable versus a USCC certified compostable, USDA certifications, things like that on their bio-preferred program, and what the impacts could be and how they can make it easier for you. This is, I hate to say, a unique opportunity that people have to reset what they're doing in their establishments.
And that's a great segue going into our next section, which is on recycling and sustainability. I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Hi, yes, sorry. Justin Williams with Wells Fargo. So actually I have two questions. The first one is for Anna. You spoke about with LinkedIn and that you work with your waste haulers, you have a great relationship, especially for composting. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure where all of your locations are, but that is a challenge in a lot of markets. I mean, I think we have a great relationship with our waste hauler, but ultimately it's the local council, that determines what happens to that waste that the waste hauler brings. So the waste hauler could separate the compost, the recycling, and the landfill, but at the end result, if the local authority just does not have that capability, then it's all just going to go to the landfill anyway. So I was really just curious about your take on that.
Yeah.
The next question I do have for the panel is that one of the challenges that we continue to see is when goods are brought into sites, whether it's just the delivery or whether it's how the individual items are packaged, there's a huge amount of plastic waste. The plastic wrap, that comes with all of these type of things, and whilst we continue to push back on that, it's there continues to be that issue with the supply chain of how do we get rid of this single-use plastic wrap that the products come in.
Well, that's a good kind of segue into our polling
I can address the first question.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you for asking that question. It is very hard to have global consistency in your waste management strategies when the waste management is not consistent globally. It is very different from county to county, even city to city, and the relationships help, but ultimately, you're from Wells Fargo, right? Yes, so Wells Fargo is a pretty big global company, right? I think it's, my hippie Anna's coming out. We spend a lot of money. We have big companies globally. We are the catalyst for change. If we need to partner with B of A is here, tons of companies are here. We all produce a lot of waste, and so partnering with the local cities and the governments to try to figure out how we can work together to provide better infrastructure to handle our waste, I think is the only solution. And that's where you start to get into the political realm of like, where, how are you funding this? Do you need all of these companies that work in this zone to, try to do some fundraising or give money or whatever, because we're all in it together. We're all on the same planet, So,
I'm going to call her Hippie Anna from now on. Let's go to our next polling question, because this one, I don't know if this is going to confuse us or not. So, where does the United States rank in the world's most sustainable countries? So let's see what our poll comes up with. Very interesting. Well, at least they all know we're not really good. None of the good numbers. Believe it or not, we are ranked number 24 in the world. Shame on us. Denmark, Luxembourg, and Switzerland are 1, 2, and 3. The top 10 are held by European countries, with which Anna and I talked about how behind the times we are and how forward-thinking they are. And Japan actually just jumped about 10 slots and is now number 11. So we are 24. There's a lot of countries that are ahead of us that you sit and go, that's a little bit scary. So I guess my question is, why do you think our numbers are so low?
Oh, there's a bunch of reasons for this. Well, it's a loaded question, but one, education piece. Two, if you look at it on the real estate side, a lot of our infrastructure is old. So when you're talking about infrastructure, there wasn't really forward planning, right? Like we just threw up concrete, these buildings got put in place, they served their purpose. Now we have a pandemic, we see these buildings not being used. When you look at storm surge, all these different things, like, was it the proper use of the space? And then when you look at residential sides, like, I don't want to go into a real estate tangent, but like urban sprawl, we all want single family homes and spreading out across the land. But like the reality is, dense city centers usually are the most sustainable. So when you bring up countries or certain cities, I just did a study on Switzerland, and like they're super efficient, and they find energy in, I guess, utilities and commodities that they have, specifically water, and they just thought through the process a little longer than I think we did. And now we're seeing that, which is great, but it's hard to make these large infrastructure changes when a lot of this hard infrastructure is already in place and we rely on it so much. I think you can all relate to that when it comes to public transit. That's probably one of our biggest opportunities. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. But I think, we're making some forward strides. And I think, again, the younger generation really just knows what's at stake. And they're really trying to put some precedents in place to change it.
we need a huge cultural shift in the U.S.
Yeah.
When you look at APAC and EMEA, it's part of the culture to sit and drink your coffee. Your coffee is also not 20 ounces, it's smaller. But it's a cultural thing. We like convenience, we like portability, we like quick. We move really fast. We were just talking about the difference between those of us that are from California versus those of us in New York, and how, James, that was you, right? You said, no, it was someone else. Anyways, we're at a four-way stop, and the person from California has a latte in their hand, and they say, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go. And in New York, they're like, well, I'm going. And so big differences across the country, right? But ultimately, we need to look at how our supply chain has morphed over the years since the industrialization times and the creation of single-use packaging and plastic. A lot of companies in this room created smarter packaging that was easier to transport and ship, and it saved costs. And now we are in this predicament where we have piles and piles and piles of single-use packaging that will forever stay there.
Right.
And we are all eating one credit card's worth of plastic every week because of all of the microplastics in our water streams, in our oceans. Like, it's a big problem. We need to fix it.
So to be respectful for all of your time, I'm going to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. Let's look at our next myth. All plastics that you put in a recycle bin are recycled. I know you guys are pretty smart on this. Then, okay, I'm going to try and get you with a polling question. What is the percentage of recyclable items that actually get recycled no matter what you put in that bin? What are the percentages? Let's look at that polling question. You guys are so smart. Look at that. 9%. That's embarrassing. I almost dropped when I saw that number. 9%. Michael, I'm going to throw this to you because you were the one that taught me a very interesting thing on the recycle thing. So why is that number at 9% versus it being at 20% or 80%?
So the number stands at about 9%, not because people aren't putting things in a recycling bin, but because they don't pay attention to what they are putting in the recycling bin. So a few of the key things is everybody loves that little 3 arrow symbol with the number in it, what's called the chasing arrows, but people don't know, does that mean it's from recycled content? Does it mean it can be recycled? So in general in the US, number 1, number 2, and number 4, if you see those numbers, those can readily be recycled. Number 5, which is Polypro, which is what most people are using for their to-go packaging, can only be recycled in a handful of locations. There's 670-ish recycling centers in the US, and maybe 20 to 30 of them, I believe, take number 5. The rest of the numbers are almost irrelevant. Number 7 literally means nothing. It means it's not recyclable. Number 0 means the same thing. So when people see that symbol, they feel great about it. The bigger problem is when you, for something to be recycled, if you get, let's say, a soda bottle or a water bottle, and I unfortunately ruined Barbara's day the other day, the cap and the little collar are number 5 plastic. If you don't cut that off of your number 1 plastic bottle, when it goes into the system, the optical sensor will see it as 2 different plastics, and a little blower pushes it off the line.
Isn't that amazing? I took the cap off. I didn't take this little ring off. So every time I'm cutting this ring off, I'm cussing at Michael because he taught me that, and now I'm anal about it. My poor husband, I yell at him constantly because he puts it in with the cap on. But that ring has to be off or it's going to kick it out. Isn't that amazing? All that recycling you all have been doing added to that 9%.
As well, if there's still food left in the containers, it also gets rejected. And normally when it gets rejected by an entire bag, not even an individual piece. So a lot of the efforts that people put into doing this, it's literally one of these one bad apple spoils the bunch. If there isn't good education in the entire system, literally one person throwing one bottle in can throw the system into turmoil. And the big cost and the big problem with recycling isn't that the system isn't built, isn't that the system doesn't exist, it exists. The cost of recycling is actually the cost to then take all the goods that got to a recycling center and got refused and then have to go to a landfill.
Yep. And then what does get recycled needs a buyer. There needs to be a market for someone to purchase that plastic to then turn it into something else. Currently, there's a shortage of buyers. So that plastic's sitting in bales at our processing facilities with no home. And so if there are no countries that are purchasing the plastic to turn it into a park bench, for example, then it's going to stay there. And so we really need to look at this system and figure out, like, ultimately we need to reduce the total quantity of plastic that's being sent in general, but also find solutions for upcycling and creating a second life for that plastic.
Let's look at the next myth, which is sustainable packaging refers to the actual packaging a product comes in. Anna, can you kind of touch on that? Because I think we're aware of some of the challenges with shipping and things like that, but if you can kind of touch on that, I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so, thinking that you are ordering, this recycled glass mug from X location, and then as the client never sees the actual product and how it arrives, but you do some digging and you see that each cup is individually wrapped in plastic. And so really digging in and asking the questions and having your food service operators, ask those questions as well to their distributors and partnering with their distributor as well. It's like, they're not bad guys. I'm not trying to say that. We all want to do better for the planet and for the environment, so just figuring out some potential pilots that you guys could roll out working with your distributor, I think is a great solution. And I think, Mike, maybe you can touch on this, but the fact that, about corn-based compostables and how we think that they're all compostable, but in reality, they're not always. And so if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I guess without getting to any specific nuances of any materials or products, when you're looking at a lot of products that are represented as a whole host of words, eco-friendly, green, biodegradable, compostable, whatever it might be, it's absolutely critical to actually look for underlying certifications and testing, and any of the companies that are representing that they're selling these products should have it. One of my sort of biggest pet peeves is when we look at these things and we find out that they're not, because the standard in the US to be certified compostable is that it breaks down by 60% in 90 days, which is actually the lowest standard pretty much anywhere. It keeps on moving up, so there is change, and that's the good news. But what happens a lot of the time is that different manufacturers will blend in, is the industry term, certain percentages of plastic. If you know that the threshold is 60% in 90 days, you might use 35% plastic mixed in with 65% PLA to come up with a product that you're then representing to people does one thing, and that's why, as Anna pointed out, she would go to her composting facility and say, does this actually work in your system? And they would give her the thumbs up or thumbs down based on that. It's one of the biggest challenges right now. Again, the good news is, in general, the whole industry is moving forward because, look, over time, all the largest buyers in the country are frankly getting more educated on what all these things mean, and they're really, all of you are starting to normalize compostables in these operations, and that's what's enacting a lot of the demand and change.
So I'm confused on the timer, guys. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna because how much time do I have left? Because this is now telling me I have 17 minutes, and I don't think I have 17 minutes. Anyone, someone, sound guy.
Yes, you do have 17 minutes. Actually,
I do have 17 minutes?
Yep, 16:41, yeah. Okay.
It was showing 18 like 20 minutes ago. That's why it was kind of like, oh, wait a second. Let's jump over to alternative proteins. Now, I know that was a little low on our list, but again, we're educating, we're learning more about sustainability. So, Anna, can you kind of touch on why there's so much attention on plant forward in food service these days, and how is it better for the planet?
Yeah, there's a very good resource, if you haven't heard of it, it's the Eat Lancet Commission summary report, and you can download it, and it comes in many, many languages. It was published in 2019, and they've also since published in 2020 another planetary planet health diet updated kind of look at diets, and what they both kind of come back to is, will we be able to feed the world's population by 2050 in the way that we are producing food and wasting food right now? And the quick answer is no. We will not be able to feed the world's population by 2050. And in order to be able to have the world not fall apart and be able to feed everyone, here are some solutions to be able to make it happen within our planetary boundaries, is the way they refer to it. And it's a fascinating report. I highly recommend you check it out. And so one of that is switching to a more plant-forward diet, not vilifying meat, but just eating more plants. And Michael Pollan said it best, you know, eat real food or eat food, not too much, mostly plants, without vilifying protein. However, you know, the reason why beef gets a bad rap too is that, you know, the high carbon footprint of it, and generally we just tend to overconsume on protein, and our bodies don't need as much protein as we are consuming. And so so increasing our vegetable intake will ultimately produce the need for more of a production of veggies, and looking at the ways that our meat sources are actually raised, and instead of depleting the land, are we regenerating the land to try to reduce all this carbon? And so that's kind of the direction that we're all going in. And the Eat Lancet report also ties back to the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs. There are 17 of them that the UN committed to in the Paris Climate Accord as well, to try to reach planetary health, reduce poverty, and improve the health of our populations, our oceans, and the planet in general. So please check that out too if you're not super familiar with it.
And Anna will be here after the session because she was such a wealth of knowledge for me over the last 2 months. I mean, it's unbelievable. We'd be on calls and she'd be in the chat sending me links. So she's a wealth of knowledge, and it's wonderful to have her here. Let's look at our next myth, which is that all plant-based food is good for you. Now, any product is healthier for you closest to its raw form, obviously. So if we're eating our vegetables raw is the best, but as we're eating our vegetables, as we start to manufacture or produce different things and put things in, it makes it a little less healthy. The problem is, we all in this room know that if you're going to offer, like Kate's company, only plant-based, you're going to get people pretty ticked off at you, and they're not going to be eating at your location. So there is that happy medium of, we've got to do some plant-based that tastes good. And in order to taste good, we obviously have to do some. But what do you all think, any comments on that, on why you think this is a myth? Any additional comments? So, you good? Anybody? Nobody wants to touch this one, but it is a myth.
Plant-based is going to be one of those terms that will become like greenwashing, I think. There are a lot of highly processed food-like items that are coming out on the market that have ingredients that you can't pronounce, and that ultimately, when you break it all down, they're GMO coming from here, so huge footprint in creating the actual product itself. When in reality, we could be focusing on supporting local farmers and ranchers and eating actual grown legumes and vegetables and things like that, and pushing your culinary teams to create things from scratch, if possible. And then a lot of these foods also contain hydrogenated oils, which are terrible for your body and your heart. And so it's just asking questions again and looking at the double click. So
yeah. So 20 years ago, no one knew what quinoa or farro were, or how to even pronounce quinoa. How many jokes have we seen on that one? But so what are going to be those grains that are the next quinoa? Now, I will confess, Smith was our expert on this one, so I'm not sure how much our panelists are up on their grains. Anybody have a comment on that? Michael sent me a note. Please don't ask me the grain question.
I can answer that. I used to cook as well. So there's a big emphasis on ancient grains and bringing them back, and it's more about education. They already exist. People all over the world are already cooking with them. It's part of their culture. Quinoa and amaranth they come from South America. They're seeds, they're not grains, but huge nutritional benefits. And so it's about education and exposure and, having your culinary teams maybe try to focus on one innovative product that they haven't used before is a great way to introduce it to them for talent development, but to your clients or your consumers as well. But it's also, that's one of the strategies for eating more plant forward. It all kind of ties back to that. The Menus of Change team has a huge emphasis on plant forward. If you go to their website, Menus of Change, they have really great resources for your chefs to be able to download to learn more about what plant forward is. It does not mean meat-free or dairy-free. It just makes the plants the star of the dish. And so I recommend that as a resource as well.
So amaranth, millet, teff, there are a lot of these grains that are actually gluten-free, Shane. So there are some grains out there that you can actually benefit from because that gluten intolerance or gluten-free is becoming more of an issue now. So those 3 are actually gluten-free. So that's a product that you could put into your menus that will help the gluten-free aspect. We actually ordered some of these products, and it's supposed to be in the back of the room. We have some of the samples so you can actually see it, because it's really interesting to see. Amaranth is this little tiny bead thing, and some are more looking like farro and things like that. Any questions before we go into workplace space planning? We had to wake Bob up. Oh.
Hi, it's actually a hybrid question. I don't know why I feel any of you are going to know the answer. So we work with a lot of people on getting them on sustainable plates made out of palm. And I was in a conversation where the client got crazy on her chef, saying you're putting short rib on a completely compostable plate, and that is the least sustainable meat. Can you shed some light on that for me?
Oh, that's a little silly. Well, again, beef is vilified right now. I don't think it needs to be the villain at the moment. We just need to look at how cattle is raised and see if there's ways to improve it so that it's regenerative and giving back to the land. And so, yeah, I mean, from that aspect, right, of beef being the bad guy, it does have a high carbon footprint, so that's a given, and one of the reasons why they do say to eat less beef, so that maybe that's where your chef was coming from. But then I'm wondering if, usually for compost, they say not to mix animal products with vegetable scraps, but most commercial composting facilities don't, it's not an issue. So perhaps your chef should get educated on the composting process.
and I always think that's that too sustainable part, because someone is, I think we have another question. Do they have the mic already?
Hi, it's me again. So, Michael, I mean, you know, we were all just sitting around the table going, oh my God, all those efforts we were doing with recycling our plastic bottles has just gone to waste. So
exactly.
we're now going to get our scissors out and cut off all the top of the bottles, it seems, to make sure they get recycled. We're seeing a lot of plastic bottles come through that are partially made of, plants. I mean, is this now just a waste? Because, you've already identified that, just standard plastic bottles, we have enough problems just getting those recycled. And now we're seeing, plastic bottles which are part plant-based. They're not fully plant-based, they're part plant-based. And there are some efforts through these bottlers to try to be green, but it sounds like we shouldn't be bothering with that. Am I right? Or
yeah, that's almost greenwashing.
Okay. So then, if we're looking at product lines, internally, then we should kind of be looking at, cartons, aluminium, plastics, and then kind of right at the bottom should be these mixed plastic bottles, and try not to even have those.
Or maybe one of the things Anna does is actually she reaches out to the company that does the recycling in their area, And weren't you saying that that's probably something our team should be doing?
Yeah, you can, I mean, it depends where in the world you have these bottles, because I don't know if you can source them globally, but I mean, we've eliminated all plastic bottles from all of our micro kitchens, so we're only doing glass and aluminum. Which in itself, anyone could argue, well, glass is not that sustainable. It's very heavy. It's hard to recycle in some places. So everyone's going to have an argument. But it's about making the best decision for your company, depending on where you're at now. And I think we are going to see more blended polymers emerge on the marketplace that are blended with plastic. But in reality, plastic is petroleum based. Every single piece of plastic that has ever been created still exists. And so if it's petroleum based and it's made of plastic, it's going to be here in thousands of years. So I guess make the right choice for your company with all the information that you have at hand, and ask questions and hire consultants to help you kind of dig into these issues.
So I would say when you're looking at all those different options, I think what's happening now is again part of this iterative process where a lot of companies are going through a very steep learning curve, and you're seeing a lot of new materials come out, and some are succeeding and some are failing, and they seem to have an 18 to 24 month cycle of success or failure. And again, it's part of it is this learning curve of, okay, we were using this plastic product and now we went with, and I know a few of the larger drink makers went with 30 and 40% less plastic in their bottles to make thinner bottles, and it seemed like that was very successful for them. And at the same time, they're sort of, again, not as somebody who makes these products, but I'm seeing a lot of sort of A/B testing of different materials and different products going into the market, and we're a little bit all part of the learning curve experiment of these things, and we're again watching some products have more success than others. Years ago, there was a product called Sun Chips, I think Sun Chips still exists, and they tried to do a packaging, and it didn't work. And one of the great things about that failure was the company owned it, and they reinvented, and they came up with they came up with a better packaging. And we're watching that. We're watching things work and not work, and then industry is moving, and it's this 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but everyone seems to be moving ahead. So while I don't know that that's I don't know if that's a product that's going to succeed or fail. We're just watching packaging in general have probably more attention. I know there's been more VC and private equity investment into new materials in the last 5 years than probably ever, and a lot of new products are coming on the market. So, again, try not to get into this baby in the bathwater situation where everything is amazing or horrible. It is part of a process. When PLA first came out, it didn't work. It was UV sensitive. Literally, if you left a cup on a table, sunlight would burn a hole in it. Right? It would become like a shrinky dink in a warehouse at over 120 degrees. But the industry learned, and it made it better. And that's really what's going on. So, again, as much as we all can, try to take a long-term view on a lot of these things. In the 15-ish years that people have remotely, in a real way, cared about composting and a lot of these environmental movements, we've gone from 10 composting centers in the US to about 170. So there has been mass infrastructure, mass adoption, mass change being made in a very real way in the US. And again, it's up to all of us to find the things that work and to make them the norm, as opposed to plastic being the norm.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Is it on? Hey, it's on. I can hear myself. Hi, Ken with Guggenheimer. So you talked earlier a lot about changing behavior. what strategies have you seen work in the workplace, and is the onus on us as providers and workplace experience to help create or help make that decision for the consumer by elimination? And I kind of take that as a look around the room, right? We've got cups, we have plastic goods, we got paper, and if we just had cups, would we have eliminated waste?
Yeah, so I didn't get to weigh in on that question earlier, and I think it's a great question for workplace experience and the idea of habits. So I would agree that there is a lot of onus on the operators and even the designers of space. So I'll work with clients looking at new spaces, and the architects like, here's what your pantry looks like, it has this tile, and we're like, that's great, how does this work? Are we using renewables here? And what is your process for collecting them and using the dishwasher, and where are those? And how are you making it easy for people to adapt these lifestyles and these habits? So if you do plan it out physically and operationally, you're going to get a lot of success. Just make it easy for people, especially even recycling with great labeling, and that's also an opportunity to educate people. You can really make habits, and then people might even bring those habits home, but thinking through that whole process. I think I wanted to add something else, but I'll think of it.
Can we just, Bob, can we get a mic here just for one more?
I'll quickly add on to,
Yeah, while she's running the mic, that's fine.
Education, ongoing trainings for your employees, for the end user is important, as well as for your food service folks. So for us, we have food service management companies, and then we have our LinkedIn employees. We train both. We also have like a green team where employees that are passionate can join, and then they help plan and organize those events for the really small sustainability team that we have, and that's been extremely successful. And that's how you get a lot of buy-in when people see a group of employees passionate and creating change, and then it replicates around the world. It takes a lot of the pressure off the facilities or workplace team to try to do that themselves, or if you don't have headcount to hire someone to do that, it's really helpful. But marketing and clear signage are like the basics. If you can send out communications, that's really, really helpful, as well as don't give in. When you roll something out that that you've studied and you've planned, and it's for the better of the company and better for sustainability, and people are just not used to it, it's normal behavior to push back in the beginning, but sticking to it and educating as to why you did it, having the transparency to tell them why you did it is key. There will be less pushback that way and better adoption.
Yeah, and I would just add, simplification, simplify the message, always. When you're talking real estate and workplace, like bring in subject matter experts and stakeholders way earlier than you think you should bring them in. Like, it sounds counterintuitive. You're like, oh, a bigger meeting, but a bigger meeting equals less change orders and opposition later. So,
yep. Great point. Okay, quickly, yeah. You should be on.
Just really quick. Just really quickly. It's a good segue, I guess, into the question. This year in the U.S., will be somewhere around the range of 50 billion bottles, plastic bottles, buried in landfill. Wondering, where is the line? That sounds like a crisis to me. Where is the line between educating versus enforcing? And I'll use the example of, we all know we can't throw away paint cans in the garbage or you get a fine. Where does that come into play, and how does that work in the workplace of enforcement versus education, and when is the time to start making that move past that point? When I see 9% of recycling, doing this for 15 years, it's very discouraging.
personally, I think you have to tread lightly with enforcement. No one likes it, right? We didn't like it as teenagers with curfews. Very hard to put into a workplace. I personally think some states, if I'm correct, are already doing this, but I think it starts from manufacturing, where it's getting manufactured and holding them accountable. Because if you do that, less is getting to the consumer and the end user. And really, my voice is gone, so I'm going to stop there.
I mean, one good example is Itoen is this tea company. They used to produce their 16-ounce iced tea in plastic bottles. And I know Google buys a lot of it. We used to buy a lot of it. And we told them we were going to stop buying it because we were phasing out all our plastic bottles. And instead of getting upset or angry or whatever, they actually reached out and said, let's talk. Like, perhaps we can come up with a different solution. And they've since developed an aluminum can. So they now have our business. And it's to James' point earlier, it's about looking at the buying power that we have collectively to help influence change for the better.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your patience. I know we went a little over, but there was a lot of passion in the room about that. And let's thank our panelists again. They were unbelievable. And I think Rob's coming up to close us out.
Well, let me just say thank you to the panelists. What a great session. I hope all of you learned a few things. Anna, Kate, Michael, and Michael. It was great to hear the insights that you brought. And Barbara, as always, thank you for doing a wonderful job moderating. I took away a couple of things, and I'm kind of I like to stick on some numbers. So while I wrote down continuous and evolving, I hope those words kind of stay with you. Also making a habit of it. That number 24 really stuck with me, right? Ranking 24th in the world. So if you walk out of this room thinking about that number all day, hopefully that maybe makes you want to make a change. And then also that 9%, I was just astonished by that. So again, numbers are easy to remember. So 24 and 9, maybe that's the only thing you walk away with. Hopefully a little bit more.